Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this International Holocaust Remembrance Day program. We are very happy to have you, all of you here. I am Rabbi Rami Pawlotsky from Temple Bethel. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight in this virtual interfaith gathering commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day. What is International Holocaust Remembrance Day? On November 1st, 2005, during its 42nd plenary session, the United Nations General Assembly declared January 27 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The goal was that each year during this day, the world would remember the tragedy of the Holocaust that occurred during the Second World War, and also honor the victims of the genocide that resulted in the deaths of 6 million Jews and millions of others by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. January 27th was chosen because on this day in 1945, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi concentration and death camp, was liberated by the Red Army. The resolution of the United Nations in 2006 also encouraged the development of educational, 2005 by the way, encouraged the development of educational programs about Holocaust history to help prevent future acts of genocide. Since 2005, special public commemorations have been held on January 27th all around the world to increase public consciousness of the tragedy of the Holocaust and to stand against Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism as well. Today, January 27th, 2022, marks the 77th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the ending of the Second World War and the ending of the Holocaust. This is an appropriate opportunity for an interfaith commemoration where leaders of different faiths and denominations provide inspiring messages and urge their congregants to remember the Holocaust and learn from its lessons. This is our third year in a row organizing and hosting this program, this time like last year, virtually. The topic for this year is the lessons of the Holocaust. Tonight, we are virtually together, religious leaders and congregants of different faiths, to remember the victims and the horrors of the Holocaust. We are together not only to remember, but also to learn the lessons from the past and never again repeat the errors. During this program, we will have welcoming words from the president of Temple Bethel, Steve Gordon. We will share with you a video about the Holocaust. We will light a virtual memorial candle in honor of the victims of the Holocaust, and we will have religious leaders from local houses of worship, neighbors of Temple Bethel, as guest speakers. We will also have young representatives from each house of worship reading a short reading about the lessons we should learn from the Holocaust. We will ask Steve Gordon, president of Temple Bethel, to sharing welcoming words with all of us.
Thank you, Rabbi Rami. Again, my name is Steve Gordon. I am the president of Temple Bethel. I'd like to thank you for coming to our third annual Holocaust Remembrance program, which was organized by Temple Bethel's Rabbis Rami and Rabbi Daniela. And hopefully next year, we can all be together in one place and in person. In these days, when the rise in anti-Semitism, it's wonderful to see our friends and neighbors of differing religious backgrounds once again to join and support us. We welcome Pastor Timothy Bisline from Church of God of Landisville and Real Life Church of God, Pastor Doug Hinton from Hempfield Church of the Brethren, Pastor Christopher Rankin from the Trinity United Church of Christ, East Petersburg, Rabbi Daniela Schuster from Temple Bethel, and the children from those same respective institutions, Katie Bisline, Jonathan Flood, Jen Hinton, Zachary Baynard, and Sidney Rhodes. As you heard, from 1941 to 1945, Nazi Germany and its collaborators committed the systemic murder of over 6 million Jews and 11 million others, men, women, and children. The Holocaust, also known as the Shoah, was Nazi Germany's final solution for eliminating all Jewish people within the Nazi Germany's grasp. As Rabbi Rami said, on November 1st, 2005, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution marking January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. On this same day in 1945, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi concentration camp and death camp, was liberated by the Soviet Army. The resolution urges every member nation of the UN to honor the memory of Holocaust victims. It encourages the development of educational programs about Holocaust history to help prevent future acts of genocide like the one that happened not very long ago. The generation that actually lived through these events will soon no longer be with us. It is our responsibility to teach and remind our children that the fake news and conspiracy theories cannot wipe this from our memories and will not be tolerated. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Steve, for your words. Thank you. Now, at this moment, before we start with the ceremony and the speakers, we would like to share with you a video. It's a video about the Holocaust and also about World War II. It just states historical facts about the war and about the Holocaust, the Shoah. For many of us, it will be no news at all, but we believe it is so very important that especially younger generations are able to watch all these materials. So the video we are about to share with you was produced by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum.
The Holocaust was the state-sponsored, systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945. Jews were the primary victims. 6 million were murdered. Roma, Gypsies, physically and mentally disabled people, and Poles were also targeted for destruction or decimation for racial, ethnic, or national reasons. Millions more, including homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, and political dissidents, also suffered grievous oppression and death under Nazi tyranny. The Nazi Party came to power in Germany in 1933. The Nazis believed that Germans were members of a biologically superior race, threatened with extinction through the struggle for survival with inferior races. They saw Jews especially as a biological threat to the German Aryan race. Adolf Hitler moved to extend German power in Central Europe, annexing Austria and destroying Czechoslovakia in 1938 to 1939. In the aftermath of the violence of the Kristallnacht pogroms, the Nazis instituted the first systematic roundups of German and Austrian Jews. They deported approximately 30,000 Jewish men to Dachau and other concentration camps after Kristallnacht. Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, beginning World War II. Within weeks, the Polish army was defeated. Britain and France declared war on Germany in support of Poland. Under a secret pact with Germany, Soviet forces occupied eastern Poland in 1939, but remained officially neutral in the war until 1941. The Germans killed or resettled hundreds of thousands of Poles in an effort to create new living space for the superior Germanic race. German families settled on the vacant properties. German authorities forced the Jewish population into ghettos, areas of cities where the Jews lived in horrendous squalor under German supervision. During the next 2 years, German forces were victorious, invading Denmark and Norway, the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and France. As German troops neared Paris in June 1940, Italy, Germany's Axis partner, declared war on Britain and France. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, annexed 2 eastern border provinces from Romania, and occupied the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, and later Finland and Croatia allied with Germany. In spring 1941, the Axis allies dismembered Yugoslavia and occupied Greece. In June 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. German forces advanced deep into Soviet territory. This battle was also an ideological battle. Following German combat units, mobile killing squads, Einsatzgruppen, German order police battalions, and other SS units supported by units of the German army slaughtered Jews and other victims in mass shootings. They killed more than 1.5 million Jewish men, women, and children in mass shootings. German police and military authorities also killed Jews in mass shooting operations in occupied Yugoslavia and eastern Poland. Increasing Soviet resistance halted the German advance, preventing the Germans from capturing the key cities of Leningrad and Moscow. A second German offensive in the summer of 1942 brought German forces deeper into Soviet territory, to the southeast, to the Volga River, and into the North Caucasus region. As the German advance stalled in the east, Germany moved to consolidate its dominance in Europe. They also extended in 1942 the systematic killing of Jews to other territories they controlled or occupied. German SS and police officials established killing centers in German-occupied Poland, where the Jewish population was both relatively numerous and densely settled. They deported Jews there, primarily by rail, from all over German-occupied Europe. Carbon monoxide gas, or Zyklon B gas, hydrogen cyanide, were the primary methods of murder. In late 1942 and early 1943, Soviet forces counterattacked and began liberating territory from German domination. In the west, Allied forces invaded Sicily and the Italian mainland that summer. In June 1944, Allied forces landed in northern France, beginning the liberation of Western Europe. Meanwhile, from the east, Soviet forces reached Germany's eastern borders. As the Allies forced German troops to retreat, Allied troops began to encounter tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners. In an effort to prevent large numbers of prisoners from falling into the hands of the Allies, the Germans forced the evacuation of many camps, compelling thousands of prisoners to march into the interior of Germany. Prisoners called these forced marches death marches. By the spring of 1945, conditions in the remaining concentration camps exacted a terrible toll in human lives. Overcrowded, filthy, with few supplies, these camps became sites of mass death. Around half of the concentration camp population in January 1945 died before the war's end. World War II ended in Europe with the unconditional surrender of German armed forces in May 1945. In addition to millions of other victims, Nazi Germany and its collaborators murdered close to 2 out of every 3 Jews in Europe. Hundreds of Jewish communities in Europe, some centuries old, disappeared forever in the massive crime we now call the Holocaust.
Thank you very much. At this moment, we will take a moment to honor the victims of the Holocaust. In order to remember and honor them, we will show you a virtual memorial candle. We cannot light a real candle together, so we will show you a virtual one. I will ask you if you are able to please rise as we observe a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. You may be seated. Thank you very much. We are very thankful this evening to have 4 religious leaders who will share with us their thoughts about the Holocaust. There were originally 5, as it was publicized in the flyer you surely view. However, Pastor Mark Ammerman from Grace Church, unfortunately, was not able to make it last minute. We hope the messages from the religious leaders inspire us and help us to learn important lessons, to remember the Holocaust and to honor its victims on this International Holocaust Remembrance Day. In addition, we will invite 5 young representatives from each one of the houses of worship to read a text about the lessons of the Holocaust. This text was adapted from an article by Erin Kotler, a retired law professor at McGill University and former member of the Canadian Parliament, former Minister of Justice in Canada, and also former Attorney General of Canada. All right, so now we will begin with the readings and also with the speakers. I ask first Nadav Sofian from Temple Bethel to read lesson number 1.
The first lesson is the importance of the duty of remembrance. For as we remember the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, defamed, demonetized, and dehumanized as prologue or justification for genocide, we have to understand that the mass murder of 6 million Jews and millions of non-Jews is not a matter of abstract statistics. For unto each person there's a name, unto each person there's an identity. Each person is a universe, as the Jewish sages tell us. Whoever saves a single life, it is as if he or she has saved an entire universe. Just as whoever has killed a single person, it is as if they have killed an entire universe. And so the abiding imperative, and that we are each, wherever we are, the guarantors of each other's destiny.
Thank you very much, Nadav. To read the second lesson about the Holocaust, I would like to invite Katie Blistein, representative from Church of God in Lancaster.
Hi. Lesson 2, the danger of the state-sanctioned incitement to hatred and genocide, the responsibility to prevent. The enduring lesson of the Holocaust is that the genocide of the European Jewry succeeded not only because of the industry of death and the technology of terror, but because of the state-sanctioned ideology of hate. This teaching of contempt, this demonizing of the other, this is where it all began. And as the Canadian courts affirmed in the upholding the constitutionality of the anti-hate legislation, the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers, it began with words. These, as the courts put it, are the chilling facts of history. These are the catastrophic effects of racism.
Thank you very much, Katie, for your reading. And now I would like to invite Pastor Timothy Wilstein, from the Church of God in Landisville, and also pastor at Real Life Church of God. Please, Pastor.
Thank you for the opportunity. We're having a few technical difficulties on our end, so I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation to be part of this event. I guess what I want to share with you starts with my shoes. My journey into the tragedy of the Holocaust started a long time ago when I got a chance to visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I've been there many times since, and on that first trip to the Holocaust Museum, I went through a room in the museum where there were shoes, real shoes from those who perished in the death camps. And it was overwhelming to see the number of shoes. And I vowed that day as a young man that I would never forget my brothers and sisters who sacrificed their life. And so every time I see a pair of shoes, I think of those who gave their life. For me, it was seeing was believing. Walking into that room, seeing was believing. And that's a phrase that we use a lot in our culture, but people have trouble with that phrase. As a person of faith, as someone who loves God dearly, I also know that believing is seeing, that God gives us faith to be able to see things that others cannot. And so I guess what I want to share with you tonight is just that simple fact that for me, seeing that room of shoes was the beginning of my journey to remember this event, to remember a group of people, to remember a terrible time in our history. And it led me to some thoughts from Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus talked about our eyes being like the lamp for our souls that provides light for our body. And when our eyes are healthy, there's light and our whole body is filled with light. And when our eyes are unhealthy, our lives are filled with darkness. And I thought today, back on that day when I went into the Holocaust Museum for the first time, I was seeing darkness, but somehow it was filling my soul with light to remember, to never forget, to do all I could to bring dignity and respect to all kinds of people. Many people that day were robbed of their future and the opportunity to bring light into the world, a life robbed of dignity and respect and a contribution to change the world with their lives, so many. That day, my eyes were opened. And though that whole trip through the museum was a moment of darkness, really, for me, it brought light and illumined my soul to, again, never forget, to continue to lift people up in prayer and to continue to fight this fight of respect and dignity for all. I just want to close with two quotes from some authors that I have read over and over in seminary and in college. One of my favorite authors, Elie Wiesel, says, "There are victories of the soul and spirit. Sometimes, even if you lose, you win." And I felt like on that day, that first trip through the Holocaust Museum, I had lost a lot, but somehow my soul had won that day by bringing all that darkness together to bring light and illumination into my life. And then I'll just close with a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel. "Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. And so I pray that tonight, as we remember, it will bring amazement and remembrance for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Bisline, for your powerful and very beautiful words. Now, I would like to invite Jonathan Flood, representative from Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church in East Petersburg, to read for us lesson number 3.
The genocide of European Jewry succeeded not only because of the state-sanctioned culture of hate and industry of death, but because of the crimes of indifference, because of conspiracies of silence. We have already witnessed an appealing indifference and inaction in our own day, which took us down the road to the unspeakable. The genocide in Rwanda, unspeakable because this genocide was preventable. No one can say that we did not know. We knew, but we did not act, just as we knew and did not act to stop the genocide by attrition and death. Indifference and inaction always mean coming down on the side of the victimizer, never on the side of the victim. Indifference in the face of evil is acquaintance with evil itself.
And now I would like to invite Pastor Pamela Carnes from Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church in East Petersburg to share with us her thoughts about this day. Pastor.
Good evening, and I want to thank you for the privilege of being able to share with you this extremely important remembrance. As a Lutheran Christian pastor, the responsibility that I feel weighs heavily on me this night. For I am reminded that the majority of the Lutheran pastors and congregation members stood by in silence while the Nazi regime under the leadership of Adolf Hitler murdered 6 million Jews, men, women, and children, 2/3 of the population of Israel today. I grieve deeply the silence of their voices. Because of their silence, they became accomplices to the savage and systematic genocide of innocent people who were their neighbors. They failed to love God because they did not love their Jewish neighbors. Jesus' teaching is clear for us who follow him. Everyone is our neighbor, and we love God by loving our neighbors. Because the German Lutherans failed to acknowledge the Jews as neighbors, they were indifferent toward them. They saw the Jews as being of no importance to them, so whatever happened was not their concern. I have often pondered their situation and wondered if fear silenced my spiritual ancestors. But not everyone was afraid. There were some Lutheran pastors from the German Protestant church to which the Lutherans were part of who came together and stood against the Nazis. They were part of the confessing church. They opposed Hitler, and they despised and were infuriated at his takeover of the German Protestant church. I'm grateful for the example of those pastors who lived out their faith and took action to stop Hitler and the evil he perpetrated against all our Jewish neighbors. One such pastor was the Reverend Dr. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. His faith gave him the courage to oppose the godless evil that had overtaken his country and his church. Even though he was a pastor, he became involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler with members of his own family because he knew the evil and suffering that Hitler was inflicting on the Jews and others. And so tonight we remember those who have died from Auschwitz. There is much to remember and much to learn. We learn that indifference to our neighbors is really a rejection of them, a denial of our love for them. In the Christian tradition, as I said earlier, to hate neighbors is a failure to love God. For God expects that love for him is always love for neighbors. And now is the time to lift up our voices together as a sign of our love for our neighbors. Because there are voices now that speak hate about our neighbors, voices threatening our neighbors with oppression and harm, voices that still dehumanize and vilify our neighbors, voices that speak lies and myths about our neighbors, voices as recently as Tuesday that spoke hate as they spread racist flyers across parts of our country, blaming our Jewish neighbors for the COVID-19 pandemic. So sadly, this is not new behavior. It has been going on for more than 1,000 years. This is the work of the evil one. He constantly seeks and finds people who will embrace his lies as he fans the flames of fear and prejudice and outrage, to incite those who follow him to perpetuate violence and the destruction of our neighbors, and to do battle with those whose voices and actions are love, acceptance, and solidarity with all our neighbors. All who follow Jesus are expected to resist and oppose the evil one and those who carry out his work. To that end, we pray so we may love. We pray so we may find our voice to speak love, to speak truth, to embody acceptance, and to bring an end to silent complicity, because we love God, and God is loved by our love for neighbors all.
Thank you very much, Pastor Carnes, for your powerful words. It's so important for all of us to have all of you, religious leaders, sharing your thoughts with us tonight. Thank you very much again. Now, I would like to invite Katie Wieslein one more time, representing Church of God, Landisville, and Real Life Church of God as well. She will read for us lesson number 4.
You're stuck with me. He had to step away to be with our youth tonight, so I'm going to read lesson 4. It's Pastor.
Please.
Combating mass atrocity and the culture of impunity, the responsibility to bring war criminals to justice. Lesson 4. If the 20th century, symbolized by the Holocaust, was the age of atrocity, it was also the age of impunity. Few of the perpetrators were brought to justice, and so, just as there must be no sanctuary for hate, no refuge for bigotry, there must be no base or sanctuary for these enemies of humankind. Yet those indicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity continue to be welcomed in international fora.
Thank you very much for your reading. Now I would like to invite Jen Hinton, representing Hempfield Church of the Brethren on Mannheim. She will read for us lesson number 5.
Lesson 5 is the complicity of the elites. the responsibility to talk truth to power. The Holocaust was made possible not only because of the bureaucratization of genocide, as Robert Lifton put it, but because of the complicity of the elites, physicians, church leaders, judges, lawyers, engineers, architects, educators, and the like. Indeed, one only has to read Gerhard Mueller's book on Hitler's justice to appreciate the complicity and criminality of judges and lawyers, or to read Robert Jan van Pelt's book on the architecture of Auschwitz to be appalled by the minute involvement of engineers and architects in the design of death camps and so on. Holocaust crimes, then, were also the crimes of the Nuremberg elite. As the Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel put it, cold-blooded murder and culture did not exclude each other. If the Holocaust proved anything, it is that a person can both love poems and kill children.
Thank you very much, Jen. And now I would like to invite Pastor Doug Hinton from Hemphill Church of the Brethren in Mannheim to share with all of us his thoughts. Please, Pastor.
As I listen to you speak tonight, as we read these accounts, I not only grieve the past and what has been done, but I grieve the present and what can be done. You see, that the Germans, they needed a hero. They needed someone to pull them out of the depression that they were in from the First World War. And they needed a hero. They needed a strong central figure to lead them out of the mess that they were in. And this vacuum, this void, Hitler and the government were able to fill, and they were able to partner with the church or parts of the church to do this. How many people today are looking for a hero or looking for a leader to crush their enemies, a central government to take charge? It's concerning. And this reading with the elites, it struck me, we at times we adopt this social Darwinism where if we can remove the image of God, if we can remove the image of the Creator from the people around us, then we can turn them into enemies. We can turn them into the blame that we seek instead of accepting our own responsibility in the problem. And if we can turn them into the blame, then we can make them useless. We can look at them with contempt. And this is what gives people the ability to kill en masse. When we watch the video and you see people stacked, what would drive a person to do that if their humanity was not removed a little bit at a time? And Paul reminds us in Acts, it says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everything life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far off from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When we look at our neighbors, when we look at those around us, There is an image of God in them. And we believe this because when we read in Genesis that Adam is made in the image of the Creator, and then Seth is made in the image of Adam, and that image is passed down from generation to generation to generation. And it's not hard to believe because we can see it in our own families. You ever sit in a mall and watch people? You can see mothers and daughters, fathers and sons. The resemblance is there. But if we have time, if we listen to fear and despair, if we listen to those in charge of us, can you imagine how much time it took to design such a place as Auschwitz? There wasn't only indifference there, there was purpose, there was intent. How much hate must you carry to build such an awful place? And yet the passage that I read calls us all to repent, calls us all to turn back to the Creator and recognize His image in each and every person around us. I thank you for letting us join tonight. And just one more reminder, there are times I've had to remind people that all of the early Christians were Jewish, and to hate them is contradictory to our faith. Blessings to you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Hinton. Very, very powerful again. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Zachary Baynard, representative from Trinity United Church of Christ in East Petersburg. He will read for us lesson number 6.
Holocaust Remembrance, the responsibility to educate. In acting upon the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, states should commit themselves to implementing the Declaration of Stockholm International Forum on the Holocaust, which concluded, "We share a commitment to encourage the study of the Holocaust in all its dimensions, a commitment to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust and to honor those who stood against it, a commitment to throw light on the still obscured shadows of the Holocaust, a commitment to plant the seeds of a better future amidst the soil of a bitter past, a commitment to remember the victims who perished, respect the survivors still with us, and reaffirm humanity's common aspiration for mutual understanding and justice."
Thank you very much, Zachary. Now I invite Pastor Christopher Rankin from Trinity United Church of Christ in East Petersburg. Pastor Rankin has been with us since the beginning, since our first commemoration. So again, as all of you, but it's a pleasure to have you here. So please, Pastor.
Well, thank you again for this opportunity. And I was going to say that this is my third year joining you for this, and it is a joy to be with my colleagues as we gather together, even in this virtual format again this year. This lesson is about our responsibility to educate one another. And some years ago, there was a Pew Research survey that reported that less than half of the 13,000 respondents were able to answer how many Jews were killed and how Hitler took power in Germany. Only 45% of the people said approximately 6 million Jews, 29% were unsure. So we realize that education is important, education is needed, because education helps us to remember what happened and then to look at where we are now and to think about how we will react to the injustices around us. Recently, we know of our Jewish brothers and sisters who were held hostage. We heard just the other day that there was some destruction done at the Jewish Center on the campus of Dickinson College. So we know that we are called upon at this time to be in solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters. And so we must respond And the only way that we know how to respond is to be educated. We can't forget the past. We gather this night to reflect on the past, and we realize we can't change the past. But we gather this night because we can use the past to make decisions, to make choices about today and the future. It will shape how we will relate to one another, how we will tolerate differences. And as we reflect on the past and look at where we are now, we then can we can be equipped to try to transform the world around us, to put an end to hatred, to bitterness, to war, to killing. As Mr. Gordon shared at the very beginning of our gathering this evening, that those who have lived through this horrible event in our history, they are dying off. And we will no longer have those stories, those accounts. So we must hear them, receive them, and to be educated so that we pass these lessons on to future generations. As we learned at the beginning, we are here this night because of what happened on January 27th, 1945. Liberation. And that gives us a sense of hope for what is to come. Hope that together we can put an end to these injustices around us. As the reading that Zach just shared said, that we share a commitment here to encourage the study of the Holocaust in all of its dimensions, and a commitment to plant the seeds of a better future, a future amidst the soil of a bitter past. And so let us be committed to educate, to share the stories, and to be in solidarity with one another. Thanks be to God.
Thank you very much, Pastor Rankin, for your very, very important words. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Sydney Rhodes, a representative from Temple Bethel. She will read for us, lesson number 7. It is the last lesson. Please, Sydney.
Thank you. The genocide of European Jewry occurred not only because of the vulnerability of the powerless, but also because of the powerlessness of the vulnerable. It is not surprising that the triage of Nazi racial hygiene, the sterilization laws, the Nuremberg race laws, the euthanasia program, targeted those whose lives were not worth living. And it is not unrevealing, as Professor Henry Friedlander points out in his works on the origins of genocide, that the first group targeted for killing were the Jewish disabled. The whole, anchored in science of death, the medicalization of ethnic cleansing, the sanitizing, even of the vocabulary of destruction. And so it is our responsibility as citizens of the world to give voice to the voiceless as we seek to empower the powerless. By they, the disabled, the poor, the refugee, the elderly, the women victims of violence, the vulnerable child, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. We remember and we trust that never again will we be silent or indifferent in the face of evil. May this International Day of Holocaust Remembrance be not only an act of remembrance, but a remembrance to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sydney. And now I would like to invite Rabbi Daniela Schuster, Rabbi at Temple Bethel, to share her thoughts with us. She will be the last speaker for this.
There are many lessons we should learn from the Holocaust. Tonight, I would like to highlight two of them. First lesson. During the Holocaust, the worst in humankind emerged. Discrimination, hatred, violence, cruelty, and horror reigned in the streets, in the ghettos, in the concentration camps, and in the extermination camps. However, at the same time, the best in humankind also emerged. In a world of total moral and ethical collapse, there was a small minority who showed extraordinary courage and heroism to uphold ethical values. The state of Israel called them the righteous among the nations in honor of their acts of solidarity, courage, and heroism. Contrary to the general trend of indifference, hostility, and cruelty that prevailed during the Holocaust, these people put their lives at risk to help, to rescue, and save their neighbors for the sake of justice and ethical values. Thus, we learn that humankind comprises these two opposite aspects. Let's work together in order to educate the young generations to develop the most beautiful, kind, and good qualities human beings can show, leaving behind the worst of humankind. Second lesson. The Holocaust teaches us that when biased attitudes against a minority in a society are not stopped on time, they can escalate into systematic acts of violence, including genocides. In this regard, the Anti-Defamation League has designed a diagram of a pyramid of hate, which illustrates the prevalence of bias, hate, and oppression in a society. It is organized in escalating levels of attitudes and behaviors that grow in complexity from bottom to top. So I would like to share with you this diagram so you can follow me. So you can see that there are 5 levels. At the bottom, you have biased attitudes like stereotyping, fear of differences, justifying biases by seeking out like-minded people, etc. Then you have acts of bias like non-inclusive language, insensitive remarks, bullying, etc. So the third level is systematic discrimination, like criminal justice disparities, inequitable school resource distribution, housing segregation, inequitable employment opportunities, wage disparities, etc. The fourth level is bias-motivated violence, like threats, desecration, vandalism, arson, assault, rape, murder, and terrorism. At last, the upper level is genocide, the act of intent to deliberately and systematically annihilate an entire people. Like a pyramid, the upper levels are supported by the lower levels. While every biased attitude or act does not lead to genocide, genocide takes place within a system of oppression in which the attitudes and actions described at the lower levels of the pyramid are accepted. When we challenge those biased attitudes and behaviors in ourselves, others, and institutions, we can interrupt the escalation of bias and make it more difficult for discrimination and hate to flourish. So this is the key point. when the society challenges biased attitudes and behaviors, it can interrupt the escalation of violence. It is very important to stop biased attitudes from the lowest levels of the pyramid of hate. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is not just a chapter of history. We have witnessed acts of anti-Semitism around the world and in our country in our days. This shows us that humankind has not learned yet from the past. We need to work together with the groups of our society who look for inclusion, respect, equality, justice, love, and peace, like the groups of different houses of worship which are gathered tonight in this program. We need to work together to stop the lowest levels of hate described in the pyramid designed by the Anti-Defamation League against any minority group before it escalates into acts of violence and hatred. We need to remember the past, learn from it, and be aware of what is happening in our days. Following the pyramid of hate, we should remember that any biased attitude or behavior against any group, the lowest level of the pyramid, can escalate in the worst and horrific scenarios, including genocides. Let's learn from the past and work together with our neighbors in the building of a society who cherishes the values of respect, inclusion, equality, justice, love, and peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Now, closing remarks. Simon Wiesenthal, who was Jewish Austrian Holocaust survivor, famous Nazi hunter and writer, said, for evil to flourish, it only requires good men to do nothing. Tonight, all of us, neighbors, people from different faiths, have remembered the Holocaust, honor its victims, and learn from its lessons. We pray and hope that the young generations are able to educate their children with the values of love, peace, respect, equality, and dignity. That we don't witness genocides ever again. Thank you very much again for your participation and for your support. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We appreciate very, very much. Good night, everybody. Thank you.